have a student question about the North Node in the third house and how she can actively work on it in her life. So when we're talking about the North Node, we have to bring it into the context of the South Node and where the South Node is, because the North Node is the healing balance to the residue brought over, the emotional residue brought over from the South Node that probably didn't work out all that well. So the North Node is relatively uncharted territory, so to speak. It's relatively new, but what I'm getting mostly from the North Node in the third house is that this particular lifetime, this person has to ask questions. She really has to understand things and make sense of things this lifetime. She has to understand why. She has to be curious, she has to be inquisitive, and she has to bring everything down into facts and figures and logic this lifetime. Because in contrast to the South Node in the ninth house, the ninth house kind of goes down the road of blind faith or believing something without much to back it up. You can go down the road of religious beliefs or any kind of opinion that really doesn't have any clear or concise reality to it. And so the third house now actually starts to get real. It starts to want to actually see things for what they actually are. So we know that the third house has everything to do with communication, transporting of information, and teaching and writing and reading and speaking. So all these things are going to be highly important for this person. But more than anything else, there's a sense of variety in the third house. There's a sense of seeing things from so many viewpoints rather than just one, because the ninth house can go down one viewpoint and really take it home in a dogmatic kind of way. So this is about suspending judgment and seeing things, as I said, like a reporter would, without any spin. The ninth house is full of judgment. The ninth house is very black and white. You know, if something has to be right or something has to be wrong. See, the third house doesn't have that. The third house just sees what it is, and it doesn't actually have an opinion either way. It just takes in the information. So there's an excitement about the third house. There is something in the third house that's kind of young and nimble, and it's lively, and so it kind of approaches life in a way where it kind of becomes insatiable for information. So this particular lifetime, there is this kind of need to constantly learn and to take in as much as possible and find the joy in being able to do that. Now, Robert Hand talks about the third house as the house of the heretic in traditional astrology, which is kind of interesting because the heretic was the person who went against God. And of course, God is the ninth house. The house of God was the traditional terminology for the ninth house. So there is a part of the third house that kind of constantly needs to have what I would call a healthy amount of skepticism, rather than actually jumping in and believing things, boots and all. It wants the facts, it wants the figures, it wants to read between the lines. There's a parameter thing going on with the third house. Not as strong as the sixth house, of course, but there is a need to compartmentalize things in the third house. In the opposite to the ninth house, which is kind of big picture and doesn't have any boundaries or any real fences. The third house actually wants to put things in some kind of place. And so with the third house, there's a need to make sense, as I said before, and a need to actually come to a place where you see things as clearly as possible. So this particular lifetime, listening is really important for the third house rather than talking. The ninth house likes to get the voice out there or get the information out there, but the third house is a little bit more concerned with actually listening and understanding and taking the information in. So this particular lifetime, how you can actually use the third house, the North Node in the third house well, would be to get involved in anything to do with making sure that you are educated. And when I say educated, I don't mean higher education. I'm talking about understanding as much as possible, getting everything in your life to make sense so you don't feel lost, You know, this feeling of I don't know who I am, where I'm going, what I'm doing. It's kind of like I know all the facts, I know what I need to know, I make things logical. And it kind of makes you feel kind of safe in an understanding of knowing how things are working and without having the rug kind of pulled out from under you. There is something about the third house that keeps you inquisitive, that keeps you wanting to learn more and more and more. So the is this going to work?